Well, guys, we appreciate y'all joining us this morning. We are recording this session that we're going to share with our members later on. But I know this is not the ideal way that we wanted to be able to talk about what's going on, but nonetheless, it's what we've been handed us, and we will move forward. Want to kind of give both of you an opportunity to real quick just to talk about what you're seeing from the House side and the Senate side as far as the state's response to this COVID-19 pandemic. Senator Alexander.
You got Senator Alexander on the phone?
I don't know if he's joined us yet. Murrell, why don't you go ahead and you can start us off then.
All right. Well, obviously, this is unprecedented times for us, and so it's been unusual. South Carolina has been no stranger to natural disasters over the last few years, and I was remarking this year when we had talked about creating a natural disaster reserve fund that just hope and pray that this doesn't happen this time for us this year. Lo and behold, it wasn't more than 2 weeks later we find ourselves in this pandemic. So, it's been unusual because, like, when you have a hurricane, obviously it lasts for a day or two, and then you have a response for about a couple weeks. This one's been months, and so I commend Governor McMaster. I think Governor McMaster has been doing a very good job. I mean, you probably got half the people that agree with what he's doing and half people disagree. And my time as an attorney and being in the political arena for a while is that obviously I think that it indicates that you're probably doing your job when you've got 50% of people mad with you and 50% of people with you. I tell you, he's worked hard. It's been difficult. He's tried to base his decisions off of data, and the data is coming from DHEC. Obviously, I don't think anyone can say that South Carolina was prepared for this, and I don't know how you could be prepared for this. DHEC obviously has been overwhelmed. Unfortunately, the Department of Employment workforce has been overwhelmed, and we're trying to react to those, and I think they're doing the best they can. And at the end of the day, I say this is the one thing that was amazing to me was the strength in the economy that we had prior to this. The Board of Economic Advisors met in April at their routine meeting and to review the first quarter numbers. And when you look at those numbers, we were $130 million ahead of projections. And I always point out to people is that the April 15th is probably one of our April month is one of our best months because people are paying their income taxes at that time if they owe them, and a number of other estimates and other taxes that would be owed at that time. So you look and we had 10 days of 10 to 12 days of basically restaurants shutting down and a large segment of our economy shutting down. So I think that shows the strength in our economy. They have made a prediction going forward, and they took basically a 3-month worst case scenario. Our economy is shut down for 3 months, and still with that, they're projecting we wouldn't be having to make cuts to our base budget, but that we would have some modest growth in that, maybe even have a little bit of a reserve left, but I think that's going to be unlikely, and with the cost and the expense that we're going to incur in this. So, we're working on this. I think Governor McMaster is committed to trying to reopen the economy as soon as it's safe to do so and moving in that direction. And I hope that, we can try to rebound from this. We hope for the best, and, we'll see how that goes. Legislature's coming back into session Tuesday. We're going to pass a continuing resolution to keep government operating beyond July 1st. And then it looks like we're probably going to come back, I think, at the end of September, maybe, and see about where we are in the budget and move forward with that. So that's kind of where things stand with us in the General Assembly at the 30,000-foot view. So I'll let Senator McElveen and whomever else discuss their thoughts.
Thomas, you want to provide your thoughts on the state's response?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what Chairman Smith kind of overview he gave. It's interesting because being in a state that's dominated by the legislature, we're kind of in a situation now where the governor is put in the position of calling most of the balls and strikes. And again, I agree with Chairman Smith. I mean, he's in a tough position. There's probably not any answers that are 100% right or 100% wrong. But, you know, from day one, he's had to kind of figure out the best way to balance people's lives with their livelihoods, you know, and we've all got at least that one family member that we have to be concerned about, you know, that may be vulnerable to the disease. But we also know people in our community and people in our families that may be, you know, furloughed or losing their jobs or have a lot of concern and a lot of, you know, worry about what's going to happen in the days moving forward. It is heartbreaking, you know, from a local level because of the work from a lot of people in this community. You know, we were at a point in Sumter where we probably had our lowest unemployment rate and our highest median income in our history, you know, and so the question you have is kind of where does this leave us? And, you know, from our perspective, we've been more or less shut down since March in state government. But I agree with what Chairman Smith said. You know, we were never going to let the state government shut down. I think no matter what would have happened, we would have come back and passed some sort of continuing resolution that would have allowed our government to continue functioning at least at the current fiscal year levels. But it's kind of heartbreaking again because, you know, Chairman Smith on the House side, he had put together a budget that forecasted a $1.9 billion surplus, and like you said, that's gone now. And you know, I know the House had worked on a lot of initiatives, a lot of things that were going to be good for our state, and the Senate was kind of just starting that process when this thing hit us. And so, you know, don't need to tell the business community this. You can't hardly budget on fiscal projections that are no longer there, because this will certainly strike a blow to our budget, just like it has to a lot of people's budget in the private sector. And so, you know, I think it was a prudent thing for us to do to hit the brakes on that process. You know, we'll have to come back and get new projections and hopefully pass a budget. But in the meantime, you know, we're going to meet. The Senate's coming back into session next week as well, and I anticipate that we'll pass what's called a sine die resolution to let us do certain things between the House and Senate past our required date, which is May 14th, for us to be out of session. We'll also pass a continuing resolution to allow the government to continue functioning in the event that we don't have a budget, because as you know, we're not like the folks in Washington. We have to pass a balanced budget every year. We're required to do that, and we were well on our way based on the projections we had. But, you know, some things are going to have to change now, and just like everybody else, state government will have to tighten our belts a little bit. But, you know, I mean, I kind of sit back and wonder, with all the money that's going out right now, this is going to be a tough recovery. We all remember the Great Recession, 2008, 2009. And just the other day, I was looking at, you know, the unemployment claims that were coming in back then as compared to the ones that are coming in now. And it's way higher now than it was back then. So, you know, what you hope is that as we move back in and start to reopen the state, I hope our economy jump starts, and I hope it's got the underpinnings and the foundation to keep going strong. But, you know, I think there's a lot of uncertainty right now. We've never seen anything like this in our lifetimes, and hopefully we won't, and our kids won't ever again.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, you mentioned earlier, and Senator Alexander, you kind of elaborated to it, the surplus from last year. I know there was a lot of organizations in the state, not to mention Sumter, that had submitted additional funding requests. What are y'all telling those organizations now to, you know, just hold it for next year, or what exactly are y'all telling them? Is this going to impact this far impacts beyond your standard business community and individuals, your organizations that are, you know, where we're, let's say, expecting to receive additional funds because of the surplus. What message are y'all communicating to them now?
To me, we're communicating the message is that, you know, things don't look good right now. So obviously the landscape's changed, and we hope that our economy rebounds quickly. And if it does, then we obviously will be back in September and be able to deal with things. But, you know, right now, all promises and all commitments that new money obviously has to be withdrawn. And so, you know, it's tough. I mean, you know, you think about this as we made commitments to our teachers in this state and education, and that we were going to give a large raise so we could retain teachers. And you know, right now, fortunately, they understand that this economy is difficult, and that may not occur. So that's really the logic that we're doing is let's come back in, let's pass a continuing resolution. Let's keep the money, the appropriations to the state at the same level they were last year, and let's hope that we rebound. If we do, then we can come back and write a new budget if we don't, hopefully we're not going to go further down, but if we don't, we can leave the continuing resolution in place. But, I think what we need to do is make sure we lay the groundwork to have a quick and strong recovery.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, you try to find a silver lining in every situation, and I guess one silver lining here is, you're glad this had to happen, that it happened during a year when we did project pretty big surpluses. Because if this would have happened back in the middle of a recession back in 2007 or 2008 or 9, when state government was having to cut, who knows what it would have done to us. So at least we're in a position to hopefully at least keep the status quo from our base level of funding from the current fiscal year, and then come back and reassess. I think it would be absolutely irresponsible of us to try to even pretend to go forward with a budget that had projected a $1.9 billion surplus when that's just not the situation we have currently, because as the chairman said, the landscape's changed.
Yeah. Well, as I mentioned to y'all the other day, is we had once we started promoting this this Zoom call, we were accepting questions on behalf of our business community and our membership. And I've got several questions here. Some of them are in relation to the COVID-19 pandemic. Some of them are in relation to other pieces of legislation that y'all anticipate covering when y'all go back into session next week. In regards to the COVID-19, one of the questions that was asked was, a couple weeks ago, the governor established this Accelerate SC committee that was designed to help reopen South Carolina. What do you, I know they've met a couple of times so far. What do y'all see is going to be their task? What are they going to be recommending to the governor, and what is he going to pass down to the rest of the state?
Well, I think that my talks with the governor is that this was a task force of people with expertise in those areas. And so that he broke it down into 3 different groups. I can't remember the name of each of the groups or subgroups in there, but what they're going to do is they're going to assimilate information and pass that on to the governor. My understanding is that the governor, and especially as it relates to the resource committee, which is the one that provides some guidance on the expenditure of the federal funds that's come to South Carolina, is that they're not going to make recommendations on how to spend the money. They're just going to assimilate information and provide that to the governor, and then the governor is going to work with the General Assembly in making sure that we expend it in the right appropriate places. So the one thing that we're starting to learn now about that money that's come from the federal government is that it unfortunately is coming with a lot of strings. Despite what Congress tells us that they were going to pass it without strings, they all of a sudden have a lot of strings. And so, it's really going to be a stretch for us to spend $1.8 billion. Greenville's the only MSA that qualifies for a direct appropriation. So Greenville would get approximately, $100 million coming into their community, and then the state will have the rest. And so we'll be responsible for letting that money flow down to the locals who have been impacted. But right now you got to expend it on COVID related expenses. And, it seems to be they're tightening that definition more than expanding that definition. And so that's going to be one of the issues that we're going to have to deal with is where do we spend the money, and how do we spend the money, and how do we have reimbursement? And unfortunately, the federal government is not giving us a whole lot of guidance right now. And so that's one thing that we all in the General Assembly are working on, and trying to work with the governor's office on where is that money and how do we best get it down. I mean, I think when we initially looked at this, we were talking about maybe helping, unemployment, who people are affected with unemployment state, small businesses, things to that effect. And now it seems to be that they're not going to let us create initiatives that were a result of the COVID pandemic, but more that we can reimburse costs. And that's, so, we'll have to see. And those are some of the issues that I see with that. And obviously the state tourism and lodging and restaurant association came and presented recommendations on how to reopen restaurants, and the governor seemed to follow those recommendations. So, it's a resource, and that's what Accelerate South Carolina is. And I'd be remiss if I didn't point out that we got 2 people from Sumter on there. And, when you have a crowd and you got 2 Sumterites that are on that committee, that's good for our community. So Sumter's got a seat at the table, and that's what we want in this state.
Senator
Yeah,
Dodge?
I agree. I mean, if the decision's been made to reopen the state and start moving in that direction, I think it's good that the governor's got that sounding board from folks, from different areas of the state. And, I sat on one of those committees one time when he was trying to find a new director for DSS. I thought it was a helpful process. Ultimately, I guess it's his decision to make, but I think it's good that he's taking input. And as Chairman Smith said, I think it's great that we got David Weeks sitting on that committee from the House, and we've also got Greg Thompson. Those are obviously two very capable voices that represent our committee well, and I think that it's beneficial to us to have them there.
Okay. Several questions that we had received was in regards to the governor's executive orders. When the restrictions started coming down, they were in different phases, and it almost seems like they're going in reverse as far as opening them back up. The most recent one was obviously allowing restaurants to have dine-in for outdoor seating. What do y'all see the next restriction being lifted?
I think obviously it's going to be the next restriction will be allowing indoor seating at restaurants and try to impose some social distance in it. And let me say this is what I really appreciate about Governor McMaster. I know some people criticize him for this, but he has done this incrementally. He started closing down South Carolina incrementally, and he did that based upon the recommendations and the science that was being provided to him. And again, he's looking at opening it back up incrementally and making sure that safety is his number one priority. And one of the things that I hear a lot about is hairdressers and barbershops and the close personal contact industry, gyms, and I've been getting lots of constituent calls about that. And when I talk to the governor, I communicate to him that people are concerned about that. What's the plan? And he keeps saying, "Well, I'm not going to open things up until my experts tell me that it's safe to do that." And so safety is a priority. I understand it creates an inconvenience for people at times, but you got to do what's in the best interest of the state. And I know one thing from talking to him, he's committed to trying to open us up as quickly as possible, but safely as possible. So I think that we'll get to the restaurants, have the dining, and I think you'll see in the future probably allowing the close personal contact open up. Hopefully in the next few weeks. He's lifted the stay on short-term rentals. He's lifted, the embargo or whatever he called it from people traveling out from outside South Carolina to South Carolina, requiring them to be quarantined for 14 days. So, he's doing everything he can within reason to try to get this economy open back up.
Yeah, I mean, and I think we all realize that the longer this thing goes on, it feels like it's something that's permanent, but we all know it's temporary. But at some point in time, something's got to give. And I'd probably make the same observation. Probably about a month ago, maybe less than a month, we were getting a lot of criticism for being one of the last states in the country to not have a stay-at-home type order. And my response to that is he basically had whittled out a stay-at-home by incremental shutdowns. Just wasn't calling it that at the time. But if you look at our situation through executive orders as compared to other states, we had stay-at-home. And so I think an incremental move towards getting back to some degree of normalcy is probably the way to go. But you obviously do have concerns, and I think that people need to continue doing what they can to observe social distancing and those best practices. And I think most folks are doing that. I think, like I said earlier, I think most folks have that one family member who they know is particularly susceptible to this virus, and so I think most folks are being careful. You're always going to have people in every situation who don't do the right thing. You can't really prevent that, but I think most people are doing right, and I think most folks will continue to do right. What I'm concerned about is I know locally, after Easter, there seemed to be a surge in cases here in Sumter and some of the surrounding communities because folks probably were getting together and maybe doing some things they shouldn't have been doing. So, with restaurants starting to reopen, I'm somewhat concerned about Mother's Day coming up and the potential for having gatherings that could transmit the virus. But I think that's something that Accelerate SC committee was wary of, and I think they made a concerted decision to tell the governor that it would not be best to do indoor seating at least prior to Mother's Day. But that does seem to be the probable next step is if you're doing outdoor seating now, is start moving towards reopening restaurants and getting some of those folks back to work. But, people just got to keep staying careful because it's not over with yet. We're still seeing a lot of reported cases, but, you're grateful that the hospital surge that we were all concerned about in the early days has not happened. We're not hitting capacity in most of our hospitals, and that's really the thing you thank God for, because that's the situation that I think most of us were most afraid of.
Okay. And Thomas, I've been made aware that I was calling you Senator Alexander for some reason.
I'll take it. He might not like Senator Alexander might be upset about that, but I'll take it. Thank you.
I don't know why, because Senator Alexander was he was our senator when I was at the Clemson chamber. I guess he's still with the upstate.
Well, Chris, he's in Oconee County, and he ain't walking through that door. You stuck with me. I'm sorry.
But anyway, that's my fault. I apologize. I certainly wasn't thinking of him, but nonetheless, in regards to the one thing that we've gotten a lot of questions on at the chamber is that plus internally as well as our committees is in regards to the social distancing aspect itself and like programs and events that we have as well as other things that goes on in our community. When do you, I know it's best guess, but what do you foresee as far as the social distancing aspect that would alleviate, your mass gathering venues, community events, those type things? When do you see those being able to get back to normal where those can be hosted again?
I just don't know the answer. That's a tough question to ask. I mean, we as probably first and foremost on our mind is football season. All of us are very big football fans, and we want to get back and watch football. And I don't know what I'm going to do without being able to go to South Carolina football games about every other weekend. So,
You'd be a lot happier, probably.
Yeah, probably so. I just don't know the answer. I mean, I think we're going to incrementally have to get back into that, but we're going to also have to recognize there's a new normal. And so, people, I think, people are going to be concerned for their own safety going back to events like that. And so we're going to initially have to start with the social distancing, and, hopefully we're back to normal one day, but, who knows? I mean, the best case scenario is that they develop a vaccine for this and that we all can go back to normal. But, right now, I think there's going to be some real concerns about going back to community events without having 6 feet social distancing. And I know, like, when the legislature's going back, that's one thing we're doing is, the speaker has spread the house out. We got 124 members, and people are sitting in the balconies and sitting on the side, and we're 6 feet apart. And, it's hard to legislate like that, but, that's just the new normal we're going to have to endure for the next few months. And, we hope it passes, but I think it's really difficult for us to predict when that will occur, if it will occur.
Yeah, it's the same way. I was concerned about us going back in April, but I have to say that I think we did a good job as we could of having doors open, not having essential staff in the Senate, and being as spread out as we can. It's not what we're used to, but, it worked back in April when we were there, and I've seen the same thing will happen next week. But, I mean, you talk about things like concerts and big sporting events. I mean, I just think most people at this point, as of right now, would probably say, if I go to this concert or the sporting event or large gathering, I may not be so worried about my particular situation because I'm perhaps not as vulnerable to that virus as some people would be. But again, you worry about, was it worth going to that event to go back home or in my workplace and potentially infect somebody who may be more susceptible to it. So, I mean, we can't have a nanny state, but I think, that we have to at least give people the opportunity to make responsible decisions on what's best for them and their surroundings.
Okay. One of the other questions that we had gotten, we're going to go off the COVID-19 state response and start talking about a couple of other things that we're sure y'all are going to have to address when you go back into session. Is if, obviously COVID-19, if that's what you call the 800-pound gorilla, then the 500-pound gorilla in the room is going to be the Santee Cooper issue. Mr. Chairman, where do you see as soon as y'all start back, that's going to be the number one conversation along with the budget?
Absolutely. We've devoted a lot of time for it. I know people have mixed feelings on Santee Cooper, but let me tell you, we're not going to be able to do anything with the state of South Carolina and budget if we don't get Santee Cooper straight. They cannot self-correct. They're capable of doing that, and so they're by all accounts. They, one thing when we started the process is we requested that you give us a best offer for a sale, best offer for management, and best offer for a reform plan, and Santee Cooper submit the reform plan. And I have not heard one person in the General Assembly say that Santee Cooper submitted a viable or appropriate reform plan. So we got to move forward with one of the two. And I think what we were trying to do when we went back in May was to keep a status quo where Santee Cooper had admitted in a testimony in front of my committee that if we adjourned in May without anything occurring, that they were going to implement their reform plan, regardless of how the General Assembly or the governor felt. And so, that's unacceptable to me. And I think for any state agency, and that's what they are, quasi-state agency, to try to take advantage of a pandemic to meet their own parochial needs is just outrageous. So we worked on something. We worked with the Senate leadership, and then obviously that did not prevail. The House passed it 108 to nothing. The Senate passed it something to 20 something to 13, and so we left with the minority of the General Assembly will prevailing. And so I think we backed up. We have worked again with Santee Cooper. We have tried to work with leadership. And we hope we're going to get better. We'll get better resolution on this. I think where we stand right now, we have a sign off with Santee Cooper on a plan that keeps the status quo, wouldn't allow them to do anything to devalue Santee Cooper or to prevent reform. And that's what obviously that they were intent on doing, was to implement their reforms and prevent any other reform. And so far, I think we've gotten buy-in from the electric cooperatives, from Santee Cooper, and we just trying to let some of the legislators and governor digest it and see where we are. But that's going to be an issue. And so that we're not going to pass a continuing resolution without Santee Cooper making sure that they're going to have, there'll be an opportunity for some robust and serious reform, and the citizens of the state deserve it. Because otherwise, if we don't do that, then Santee Cooper is going to end up not being able to be a financial viable corporate company and providing rates. Their rates are going to end up being higher than everyone else, and that may just affect their direct service customer, not on the coast. It affects us here in Sumter with the Black River Electric Cooperative, because the cooperatives have something called a coordination agreement that they'll purchase energy and electricity from Santee Cooper for until 2040 something. I think it's like 2045. So it's incumbent upon us to make sure that we do that. We did it with SCANA and made sure that we reduced customer rates and made us competitive. And let me tell you, the most telling thing of that whole committee process that I went through, why I would emphasize the importance of that, is when you have Walmart and you have Google and you have people who are big consumers of electricity in our state come and tell us that you have one of the highest rates for electricity across the nation. And not only across the nation, we go into, Amazon came and Google told us they go into all these, different areas for distribution processes. And South Carolina's got higher rates than some countries that you would never expect. And that's not the reputation we need as we try to recruit industry to our state. And so, Santee Cooper has historically been a very good economic development partner, but they're going to end up being an economic development hindrance for us if we don't do something with that. So I think we'll get in, we'll work on that. I think the House is going to take up the plan that passed the committee when we come back next week and send that over to the Senate. And I don't know whether the Senate will work on it for the 2 weeks or, there is some discussion, and I'll let Thomas address that may come back in August, but I think we need to have a debate on that, and trying to prevent a debate and let them move forward is just not acceptable to those of us in the House.
And Chris, I'll just add to that, that again, this is another initiative that was rolling along in the legislature with how we're going to deal with Santee Cooper based on, the legislation we passed last year, Act 95, which basically established the process for the best bid for purchase and the best bid for management agreement, and then obviously the restructuring side from Santee Cooper itself. That process was moving, and that's another thing that's been it's been blocked by this pandemic. But I've been pretty consistent with what I said about Santee Cooper from the start. I think that the legislature has got to be very deliberate and careful with what we do, because if you sell it and once it's gone, the toothpaste is out of the tube and it's not getting put back in there. And my thing has been, I can't imagine that the state owns a bigger, more valuable asset than the ports, in the port down in Charleston, Santee Cooper, and obviously our highway system. And so I think we just got to be careful about it with how we handle it. But if sale becomes the only option, then I'd probably support sale. I'm just not convinced that that's the best option at this point in time. Now, to Chairman Smith's point, I don't think you'll find one legislator who would tell you, a legislator at a minimum, who wouldn't tell you that it needs some pretty serious restructuring. And in my committee, in the Senate Judiciary Committee, there was a subcommittee that was working on, a restructuring initiative when we had to leave. And so I do think it's something that we need to take up and deal with. But the question for me has always been, you have that bad debt, terrible debt, obviously, from the decisions that were made with the VC Summer site, and that debt's got to be discharged one way or another. So my concern's always been is that when you have a big investor-owned utility come in, they can't discharge those liabilities and those debts onto their shareholders. And so, I think that if you come in and have a sale for the first 5 years, you'll probably see a rate freeze or something like that. But it's what happens beyond that, because this is a generational decision. I think it's probably one of the biggest issues we've had to deal with since I've been in the legislature, at least. Maybe the biggest issue is I just want to make sure we get it right, but the restructuring piece is important. Back when we came into session in April, there was some discussion back and forth between the House and the Senate. My understanding now is that there's been an agreement with some language that we can include for some oversight that will obviously involve Chairman Smith, who's done a lot of work with his committee and his special committee to look at Santee Cooper and where we go moving forward. But my understanding is that everyone's in agreement on the language that will be put into the continuing resolution. My understanding is Santee Cooper is okay with it. The co-ops are okay with it. And keep in mind, I don't think that me or Representative Smith have any direct serve customers from Santee Cooper, but what we know is that the co-ops collectively make up 70% of Santee Cooper's customer base. And so we obviously do have a lot of co-op folks who are being served through the co-ops who have to worry about that. And so I think it needs to be a deliberate process. And I think if we do have to come back in the fall, there's been some discussion about that. I think it would probably be a prudent thing for us to do.
Okay. One of the other things that we've been addressing for the last couple of years, along with the South Carolina Chamber and most other chambers in the state, is the business license fee and the application process, making it more streamlined. Prior to this happening, it looked like that, from what I understand, there was a lot of progress being made with that particular bill, and pretty much all the chambers, as well as the South Carolina Chamber, was supporting a uniform business license application. But at the same time, what we were a little bit different than a lot of the other chambers is, we wanted to make sure it was did not negatively impact our local government, because certainly the services that they provide from those revenues that they get goes to enhance the quality of life for our community. And it seems like the last conversation I had with people from the municipal association, as well as the government, is that they worked out a revenue neutral type of plan. Where do y'all see that going this session when y'all return?
I think we passed that in the House. So I believe that is done and it's over in the Senate. And let me, Chris, commend the chamber and local governments and everybody, because my understanding is that they all came together and supported this and resolved it. And I appreciate, the work the chamber did of recognizing, while businesses, it is the business license tax is a burden on businesses. You also got to understand, especially the cities, that's a revenue stream, and you got to strike a balance. And that's what the business community and the local governments came together and struck that balance. And, I'll let Senator McElveen speak in the Senate, but, I don't foresee, I was unaware of any opposition to the bill that passed the House the last year. I think it means passed, not last year, last week's session. I think it passed the House. I'm almost certain it did. I remember that. So I would imagine if the support's still there, that probably would be one of those bills under the sine die resolution that we passed. Is if one bill has passed the chamber, then that bill's still in play and can be debated and passed even after we adjourn on May 14th.
And Chris, to follow up on that, I know there's been a lot of discussion on that issue in the House. I have not been privy to much of it in the Senate, and that's likely because of the 5 committees I serve on. That legislation won't come through one of those committees, and so I really won't have a chance to engage on that issue too much until it gets on the floor. And so I'm not sure where the bill currently is. I'm not sure if it's gone through a subcommittee and gotten that clearance in the Senate yet or not. It's not a discussion that I think we've been having as much in the Senate as they had in the House. But yeah, I mean, I'm hopeful also that if we're going to go back and things get better, that, you know, we're obviously in the second year of a 2-year session. And I certainly hope that some of these bills that have passed the House will have a chance in the Senate. I certainly hope some of these bills in the Senate that have gotten to the House will have a chance too, because I've got several bills right now that are pretty non-controversial. But, you know, if we don't pass certain legislation by the time we leave for the year, then we hit the reset button for next year, because we're obviously in the second year of a 2-year session. And when we go back in January for a new session, it's like hitting the reset button and you got to start all over again.
One of the things that was that, Mr. Chairman, do you have something?
Oh, I was just going to say it is. I think when we passed the bill, we did that probably the last week before we adjourned, before we left. So it's just arrived over in the Senate. So it's not like it's been sitting over there. So I want to make sure that I think the agreement was reached maybe 2 or 3 weeks before we left for the COVID infection, and so I think it passed the House. So I think it does have a good shot of probably making it through the Senate.
Okay. Well,
and Chris, I would assume, and Chairman Smith might know, I would assume it's been referred to either a Finance Committee or the Labor, Commerce, and Industry Committee.
I think it's LCI.
Is it LCI? I still serve on those committees right now.
Okay. Well, thank you, guys. One other question that I got from one of our local educators here is, obviously, again, before all this came about, that the Senate and the House had passed some new legislation that provided an increased compensation to our teachers. Do you see that the loss of revenue and the possibility of that coming about, is there going to be any impact to that compensation increase to our local teachers because of what's taking place with the pandemic?
I don't foresee it being a loss to teachers from last year's raise. Now, obviously, this year we had a raise that cost over $200 million, and it was a $3,000 across the board raise. I foresee that if we don't have the revenue, which right now we would not have the revenue to do that, then that would not be in the mix of doing anything of increase of not to that amount. Whether we would probably try to make some type of increase, I think that's still a possibility. I'm an optimist with this economy, and I just really think that we will get back, and that the fundamentals of the economy were so strong. I think that we're going to, we will have not the money that we had before, but I'm hoping that we will have enough money where we can kind of take care of some core functions of government. And as far as I'm concerned, we as a legislature told teachers a few years ago that we were going to make a commitment to you to bring you up to the national average. It's like the local government fund. When we make a commitment to it, I think it's incumbent upon us to follow that commitment. I know things change, but that's still a very large priority of mine, is making sure that we compensate teachers at the national average so we can keep them in the classroom, and not only keep them in the classroom, recruit new teachers to come to the classroom.
Well, and Chris, again, I mean, that's one of the big ticket items, that I think that most legislators were committed to going into this year and going into this budget. I don't want to speak out of turn, but I think of our 7 members in the Sumter delegation, I'm pretty sure all of us were in favor of keeping that commitment to teachers. And I think that's the case for most people who serve over there. But again, I mean, this landscape has changed, and I mean, we've had a bomb dropped on us, and it's sad from a certain standpoint because there are probably a lot of good things that were on the way with this budget this year, but no one could have predicted what this would do to our economy in South Carolina. And so I think we have to keep those commitments on the front burner when we can, but we also can't write checks that we're not sure we can cash. And so I think we got to be very careful about that, be very deliberate about that. But at some point in time, we'll get projections on where we stand and what we've lost from the standpoint of our ability to budget. And so I think right now, if we answer those kind of questions about, can we keep some of these bigger commitments that were being made in a budget that assumed a $1.9 billion surplus, I think we'd be disingenuous to say right now what we can and can't do. And I think we got to be careful speaking in absolutes until we get a better idea of where we stand.
One other thing that y'all know well aware that we have been supporting, we were pushing for it last year, and right before it was able to get renewed, things died off before sign die. But one of the things that's important to us in the community is we have a lot of people that invest in small business, and entrepreneurs is the Angel Investment Act tax credit. What do y'all see that being able to be renewed when y'all return to session so it can get back into place? I'm not quite sure how often it renews. I think it was every 5 years, or is it, or I don't remember the term, but do y'all see that being able to get done?
Yeah, I think so. It's in the committee. I talked to Thomas earlier about that, and I'm hoping that we're going to do what we call kind of poll out or motion period out non-controversial bills. That's one of them. So I would foresee that will get renewed. It needs to be renewed. The only thing that disturbs me about it is that, when you get these threats from the people over they're from the upstate that they that they have to have it, and these are the ones who are making money off of it, who are investors. That doesn't help the cause, but this is a bigger issue than a few people. So, I think that some people have robbed the house wrong over there, but regardless of that, it's an bill to the average small business, and so I think we'll pass it. So that's going to probably be on one of my lists of bills to get out. And I made a commitment to Senator McElveen earlier this year that if he sponsored the bill, and that his bill would come out. And so like I told you, I feel like we have to fulfill our commitments, and that's not a negative impact to the state of South Carolina because it's a tax credit that exists right now. So I don't see any problems with that bill passing.
Well, and this is a follow-up to that too. And again, Chairman Smith, if I'm wrong, correct me, but I think we were at the point when we had to leave because of COVID-19. I think that the Ways and Means Committee was just at the point where they're about to start considering general bills, because see, they had to deal with the budget this year. They weren't taking up general bills, but we still had a lot of discussion. I think Representative Smith's subcommittee chairman is Representative Bannister, and he and I talked about some changes that need to be made to the bill on the House side. And so I got a commitment from Senate leadership that if the bill came back, we'd go ahead and just adopt the House changes and be done with it. So hopefully we'll still have a chance. But it was just, again, one of the casualties of us having to take this break and having to leave our work over there, for a short period of time during pandemic.
Yeah, and let me say and that's where the confusion comes, and why some of the frustration when you get people start attacking the House for not moving on a bill is, we come back and we take up the budget first, and we don't take up legislation till after we pass the budget, and vice versa for the Senate. Senate takes up legislation first in their finance committee, and then they do the budget on the back end. And so, that was a casualty of the COVID, because we hadn't even had any subcommittee meetings, I don't think, before we adjourned, because we just passed the budget 2 weeks before, and then we had to go in. We took a break. We furloughed after our budget week, so we hadn't even been back to deal with that. So that was on the agenda. And so you'll see a number of bills that people like lotteries, nonprofit lotteries, people are doing a bunch of bills that have passed the Senate and we're waiting in the House. You'll see those hopefully move here next week when we get over in session.
Okay, and one final question that I received actually late last night from some press that the Sumter has been getting the last couple of days is in regards to senior graduations at high school. I know that's not something that y'all can control, or if it's, but is there anything that that can be done from the state level? Because it seems like Sumter is one of the few school districts that are not allowing their seniors to actually have a live graduation. A lot of other school districts, even larger than ours, are finding a way to get that done. Is there anything that can be done to give those seniors that opportunity, or is it completely at the discretion of our local school district?
I think it's at the discretion of our local school districts, and you have an elected school board, and they have to make those decisions in conjunction with their superintendent, their school leadership. I mean, I guess conceivably we could come back and pass a bill and say you have to allow graduations. It's just going to be tough when you have 1 week to get a bill through like that. So, I see on Facebook, like probably everyone else does, is I can't imagine those who have worked so hard for 12 graduate and not be able to participate in graduation, and likewise those who went to college. And my heart goes out to them for that, because all of us had the ability to go through graduation. And I'm looking at my phone on my iPad, and there just comes a reminder that says Lil Murrell's kindergarten graduation tonight. So he misses that, as well as Thomas's daughter is missing their graduation. So I feel sorry for those folks. Certainly I'm support them, but what they need to do, to have a peaceful protest and let their voices be heard to their elected officials. And that's democracy at its best. And and we'll see how the school district runs. It's completely in their discretion, and I don't need to try to mandate to them or tell them what they need to do. But I think the citizens of this community need to speak out if they feel strongly about it. Speak out, let their elected representatives know, and see how that progresses.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, so many folks have been affected by this thing, and you can't help but obviously several of us on this call, I think, have young children, and you can't help but feel sorry for a lot of these kids who have been just yanked out of their social environments completely, and they're stuck at home with mom and dad, or babysitter, or little brother or little sister. And I think it's tough on a lot of these kids, but they've been resilient. And you think back to high school. I mean, that last semester of high school was such a great time in your life, and so yeah, you certainly have a lot of empathy for a lot of these young adults and a lot of these children who are stuck with what they're stuck with right now. But I'll tell you also, Chris, we've been having weekly conversations with members of the delegation and members of city council, county council, school board, and our superintendent's been on a lot of those calls, and the information she's given us has been very informative. I think she is doing everything she can to make the best decisions she can for the district and working with her board. And so I think we got to trust their judgment on this, because I definitely understand that other districts are doing these types of things, but you also have to look at the flip side of that. We've done all this stuff, taken all these measures for 8 weeks. We've ended school, for the year. Is it the most prudent thing for us to do to have a big gathering all of a sudden? So I don't know. I mean, there's probably no right answer to that, but I think we at least have to trust the folks who are tasked with dealing with the school board and dealing with the schools to make those decisions. And I hope that they'll make the best decisions they can, for the safety and well-being of the folks that, the families and the children that attend those schools. But it's like a lot of the calls that are being made by the governor. Who knows what the right or wrong answer is? I think we're all just doing the best we can with the information we get.
Yeah, the calls and the emails and everything that I've been getting over the last couple of days about this, basically what I've been telling them the same thing is, contact your local school board. Some people have even gone as far as wanting the Chamber of Commerce to get involved. And I've told them, I said, this is not a commerce initiative. There's not an economic impact initiative in this to where it would validate us getting involved. But, I've told them the exact same thing, Senator, that, our superintendent, there's a reason that these decisions are being made based on the data that they have at that particular time. And that's the only thing that all of you can do, the governor can do, and even our country can do, is make the best decisions we can based on the information at hand at that time. So it was just a question. I thought it was interesting, but I wanted to get y'all's thoughts. But yeah, it's just, I think just, reaching out to your, utilizing the democratic system and reaching out to your elected official on the school board and, making your voice heard, whether you're a parent, a child, or in opposition or support.
Well, I can tell you, my observation is our superintendent has been very hands-on in the short time she's been here. I think she's done everything she can to kind of learn the ropes and learn the landscape that she's come into in Sumter. And so I can't imagine, knowing her, the disappointment she probably has personally if she lets some of those children or some of those students down. But I do think that she's going to give her board the recommendation that she thinks is right and that she probably thinks is in the best, long-term interest of everybody.
Yeah, knowing Dr. Knox, I'm sure she's just as heartbroken over this as possible, with it being her first graduation that she was able to participate in. But we'll just kind of hope the best for all of them. Well, and Senator McElveen and Mr. Chairman, if y'all have any last comments, we've run out of all of our questions that we had. If y'all have any final departing comments, we'd love to hear from you.
Well, let me just thank you for hosting this, and it's always a pleasure to be with the business community and the Chamber of Commerce. And so I look forward to continuing these discussions, and if we can ever be of any assistance, please don't hesitate to contact me. So in conclusion, I just want to say I know this is tough times for everybody, especially for businesses and employees who are affected by this. But, the one thing that I love about South Carolina, I love about Sumter County, is that, in a time of crisis, we don't fight, we don't bicker, we don't argue, but we come together. And, you look at what's going on in Washington, D.C., and, the dysfunction still continues up there. And in South Carolina, we don't really have that. We're all working together. We all understand that this is an unusual time in which a lot of power and decisions are invested in the governor. And whether I agree with what he's doing or disagree, I will not ever publicly criticize him, because I cannot imagine being in his shoes and having to make these decisions that affect millions of people's lives here. And lastly, let me say, one thing I rode by, I didn't get out and go interfere yesterday, but I rode by the testing that MUSC came to Sumter and did perform yesterday at the exhibition center. And obviously they're going to do it again Wednesday and Friday. And to see the amount of cars out there, the amount of interest, and it warms your heart to watch people who feel like, I got texts yesterday, and I'm sure Senator McElveen did too, saying thank you for whatever you or the delegation did to help make this happen. Because, I've been concerned about whether I have COVID or asymptomatic, thought I may have had it, or things to that effect. And, and they tested, and the knowledge is power. And that's what, with this, knowledge is the key to knowing how we can defeat this virus, is by knowing who has it and then quarantine those folks. And that's the best way to do it. Since the inception of this, I know my first meeting I had when we got healthcare officials together before we went and passed our first little bill to give DHEC some money, is that, all the experts said the way you really defeat this is the way South Korea handled it, is that you go and test everybody, find who's positive, quarantine them, and then it'll die out. And, and that's obviously the way that you want to handle this. And, South Carolina, and as this country was unprepared to have that type of testing, but we're getting there and we're working. And so, I think that's where we are. But with this increased testing is also going to come increased positives. And we all know that. And Senator McElveen and I were talking about that before this meeting, is you're going to see an increase in people who are infected in Sumter County. Doesn't mean that we're doing horrible things. It means that people who are asymptomatic, who are now taking advantage of testing that's available to us in our community, are going to have some positive reports. But, again, we need to come together. We need to support one another in this time of crisis. And most importantly, we need to support our businesses and those who are being affected by this. And, I just really appreciate the opportunity to be able to discuss this with your members.
Yeah, Chris, thank you to you and everybody else on the call for giving us a microphone and giving us a chance to touch base and to have some discussion. And I hope it's been somewhat beneficial for everybody. But, I think the biggest thing is to know that the General Assembly can continue to work next week. Nobody's of the mind that our government's going to shut down in South Carolina and not provide resources and services that folks depend on. And, you know, like Chairman Smith said, I mean, if you look at Sumter over the last 10, 20 years, I mean, we have overcome, we've done a lot considering we're more challenged than a lot of different communities are of our same size. We don't have a major interstate running through here. There's a lot of things we don't have, but what we do have is great people and great businesses. And we're overachievers in Sumter. And so I think that's going to help us to recover when this is finally all over with. But I just, you know, I think in the meantime, we got to make sure we're telling folks at our workplace, people in our family, that while the state's reopening, please continue to be careful because this is not over with yet. It probably won't be, it may not be over with until later on the summer, and there could be a second wave. So I think we just got to be, you know, be careful of how we conduct ourselves and make responsible decisions. But you know, hopefully we will continue to overcome and continue to move forward like we have in the past in Sumter. And so it's obviously great to work with you and work with our delegation and local leaders. And I think we'll continue to stay in touch and do whatever we can to continue moving our community forward. But again, thank you for allowing us to do this.
Well, we appreciate y'all's taking the time because we know this is an opportunity for y'all to take care of some personal business that puts real food on your table, not necessarily the General Assembly. But I want to thank y'all for taking the time, and we're all of Sumter in the chamber praying for you guys when y'all go back into session. We know there's going to be a lot of difficult decisions that have to be made, but like I said, they have to be made. So the chamber behind you guys. And we greatly appreciate y'all. To all the everybody else on here, please join us tomorrow. We are going to be hosting Congressman Ralph Norman tomorrow at the same time, 11 o'clock on a Zoom. We'll be sending out those login credentials here soon. And obviously the topic of that conversation is going to be the federal response to COVID-19. So thank you everybody for joining us and spending a little bit of time with us, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.